But what most of us tend to do is we get upset with ourselves that we're dysregulated, that we're amped up, that we're freaked out, and we try and push through and endure. And what we end up doing is acting and speaking from a very dysregulated place, and nothing good happens when we do that.
Sons, welcome back to the Being Sons podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about what every child needs from their caregivers, usually father and mother. And I've never heard anyone explain it as well as our guest today. Adam Young is a trauma therapist, host of the excellent podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves, which is where I was introduced to his work. And he's the author of this new and absolutely outstanding book called The Place We Find Ourselves. As I have read even the first chapter, I began aching to give a copy of this to every human being that I know and I come into contact with. And I've already started giving them out to people as the Lord has told me to. Adam, I'm so grateful that you said yes to join us, and I know that you have an offering of goodness to bring us today. So welcome to the Being Sons podcast.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, this book right here is an answer to prayer. Back in 2006, like many of the listeners to this podcast, at one point in my story, for me it was 2006, I went to a Wild at Heart boot camp led by John Eldridge and the team. And that was the first time I had ever been introduced to the fact that my story was not my resume. My story was actually the journey of my heart, what it has sustained, what it has received, and that I am the product of that. And a lot of the issues that I find myself dealing with and the desires to become a better man, the seeking of improvement, it is accessible through pieces of my story. And it's the first time anybody had ever introduced me to the idea that we have wounds and that wounds come from people, and that we can then ask God to help bring healing to those places. And we are actually able to move out of places of contempt and anger and find solutions to the things that we find going on in ourselves that often feel uncontrollable and that we're very ashamed of, and into this freedom and goodness that feels elusive without that. You know, even though we read the Bible and we go through it, we pour through it, without this interaction with God and without this healing, I was not growing much. So, Adam, this book would have helped me so much if I had left boot camp with that whole new category and they had said, read this, this would have helped so much. So 2006, that's 19 years ago. And I have been praying and begging, and God has been giving me pieces of my story to understand. But your book has brought a greater clarity. It has been more clearly articulating the story of my heart and helping me find things that I've been praying for years. So I not for a second am I saying that God is not on time with all of this, but it's obvious to me as I read your book that God has been preparing you to write this book your whole life. And I will say similarly that God has been preparing me all my life to read this book. I did something with this book that I've never done with another book. I just knew after listening to your podcast that this book and it coming out, and after just reading the cover and a couple of things about it, I knew that this book was going to have a tremendous impact on me if I gave God permission to let it. And so I'm sitting in my chair downstairs. I get this book through Amazon, and I held it up to my heart. I've never done this with a book before. And I said, God, I know that you want to lead me into deeper healing. And so I commit to go wherever you want to lead me. And I ask that you would minister to me through this book. Let this be a supernatural encounter and conversation with you. And, well, it's helpful that your book is really well written, and I'm sure it's helpful that I prayed that prayer. But it's been incredible. Incredible. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you for your honoring words. It's so sweet to know that this book has moved you, and I love the thought of you holding it up to your chest and praying that prayer. It says a lot about your heart.
Yeah, I've been ready, 19 years, working through little bits and pieces of my story. So I want to get down to it because we have a lot to share. I really wrestled with whether to interview you on this book as a whole. I mean, almost up until last night because it's so good. But given the audience, given the men that I get to share life with, I really wanted to focus on what you call the big six. But I know that there's kind of some preliminary information that is going to be really helpful to all of us to understand why the big six is in fact so significant for us. Especially, my primary audience is going to be men who are fathers and are looking in humility to become the best fathers that they can be. So I think my very first question for you is, how important is our story?
Yeah. Well, boy, when it comes to fathering, I think few things influence our fathering more than our own developmental story in our family of origin from 0 to 18. And so very often when people think of their story, they think of like a 30,000 foot overarching view. My parents got divorced when I was 11. This happened to me when I was 16. I graduated from this school. And that stuff may all be part of your story, but it's not really what I mean when I talk about your story. I'm talking about the scenes, the incidents, the moments. It might be 30 seconds of your life. It might be 5 minutes. And you remember it and it influenced you, and you're not sure why it still haunts you. Maybe that's the best word, haunts you, but it does. And will you give those stories weight? In other words, will you write them and will you speak them aloud to other people that can hold your stories well? Because I can learn so much more about your brain, your heart, by hearing one of the stories of your life than by hearing a 30,000 foot overview of your whole life narrative.
Okay. One story, 30 seconds of my life, more than my resume. Can you explain a little bit, like why? A little bit more why 30 seconds of my life can help you see that?
Sure, because we remember the things we remember for a reason. They've imprinted themselves, and most often what we remember, I would suggest, are our tragedies. We remember our heartaches. We remember the moments where our heart was shattered, and we very often don't want to engage those memories. We want them not to be part of our story. And so we tend to dismiss them and minimize them. But if we will welcome those stories of heartache, harm, trauma, disappointment, shattering, if we will welcome them like a guest at the dinner table, and if we will listen to the 11-year-old boy or the 16-year-old boy, we will find a gold mine of understanding our brain, and particularly how our brain has been wired relationally to understand the relational world. Because we are deeply relational beings at our core, and relational harm shatters the brain. By shatters, I mean it fragments the brain. It literally fragments, separates portions of your brain that need to be connected. And when that happens, it plays out in your fathering. It plays out in your husbanding. It plays out in your vocation. It plays out everywhere because the lessons we learned as children made a big impression on our neural networks.
Okay. So I think before we enter into what you call the big six, it would be also really helpful to contrast secure attachment versus insecure attachment. What are they and why does that matter?
Sure. So attachment is just a relatively recent category over the last 40 or 50 years in developmental neuroscience, developmental psychology. And it just gets at the idea that we are created in the image of a we and not an I. We're created in the image of a triune God. Therefore, relationships have a profound influence, not just on the development of your brain, but on like what your heart longs for. We long for deep relational connection. Just think back when you were a boy, how you longed for relational connection with your father and your mother. And if that was lacking, then it was one of the most tormenting parts of your growing up experiences. So attachment falls into two broad categories, secure and insecure. And secure attachment is what happens in the brain. It refers to a healthy, connected brain when your what I call your big six needs as a child are met, that when they're satisfied by your primary caregivers. And I'll talk about those six things in a minute. Insecure attachment is what happens in your brain when those things are not sufficiently met by your primary caregivers, which is why I call the big six, because they're oh so very important for children.
Okay. So we're going to round the corner. I just want to let you do what you do so well in explaining the big six. And then I want to finish up before our conversation ends with some encouraging words, because what I know happened for a lot of you men and women out there who might be listening to this podcast is, as Adam was just explaining, that you may remember from your childhood your deep need to receive these things from your father or mother. That may not even resonate with you at this point. And there's a reason for that, which I know better now as a result of reading Adam's book. There's a lot of conflict that comes up in our hearts when we begin thinking about all of this, our story, relationships that were essential, the ones that where we did get what we wanted, when we didn't get what we wanted. There's a lot of emotions that come up, like contempt and confusion and a lot of conflict. And what we are hoping to do through the course of this conversation is to make you feel what is absolutely true, and that is, with God, you are safe to go into these places. Not only that, but it is essential for you to go into these places for you to become the man, the father, and the husband that you want to be. So fathers, sons, dads out there, I want you to know that I'm doing this, and I want you to just go with me on this journey, because it's working. It really is. God is coming for the unfathered, unmothered places in us, and he's bringing goodness. He's bringing goodness, and he's bringing hope in some of the hopeless places. So, Adam, have you had men come to you for counseling who are sad and scared about how they treat and interact with their children?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons I titled the book Make Sense of Your Story, that's the title, Make Sense of Your Story, is because in order to be the father that you want to be, or the mother that you want to be, you have to make sense, coherent sense of your own developmental story in your family of origin. Until you make sense of it, you will find yourself what you probably consider overreacting. In other words, you get activated, you get dysregulated, you say or do things that you regret, and we call that triggered, we call that activated, call it whatever you want. We all know that experience of losing it with our kids and not really being, or with our partners, and not really being sure why. And what I would say is that until you have made sense of your story, you are going to be perplexed by your own behavior. You're going to be confused why you react so strongly when you do. But here's the question. What if there's a reason? What if there's a really good reason that you overreact? And I don't even like that word, but lots of people use it, in the ways that you do and in the moments that you do. So for example, for me, whenever my son would have a temper tantrum, 8, 10, even 12-year-old versions of temper tantrums, and he would be severely dysregulated, I would have a very hard time staying grounded and staying present to him. Why? Because I was never allowed as a kid in my family to have temper tantrums. Oh my gosh, not an option for me. And therefore, he was doing on a regular basis what I was never allowed to do, and it freaked my nervous system out. And it dysregulated me deeply, and it became an obstacle to me showing up for him as the father that I wanted to be. Until I engaged that part of my story, it made it very difficult to father my son well.
Mm-hmm. And so you have found that engaging your story has had a great result on your own parenting.
Yes.
I have as well. And just to encourage the dads as we, and you know, the men, as we move into these things, they're going to feel things. The first thing I want them to hear is, stick with us, and you will be able to experience that as well. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay. So Adam, actually I want to pray first. I want to do that. It has worked really well, with regard to this topic. So our Father, we are your sons and daughters, and we want to thank you. Thank you for purchasing us back into your family by your Son, Jesus Christ. And now we ask that you do what all good fathers do. Meet us where we are. Help us rest in the truth that we are seen, loved, and safe with you. And lead us into the healing and freedom that Christ set us free to experience as we learn to do life in union with you. Okay, Adam, take us into the big 6.
The first is attunement. The first thing that every child needs from their parents is attunement. What does that mean? Attunement is reading the internal emotional state of the child. So I would invite you who are listening to not think about your parenting right now, but think about what it was like for you as a boy or a girl. Were you attuned to as a 3rd grader? In other words, did you have a sense in your body that your father, that your mother knew and wanted to know something about your internal emotional state? Something about if you were sad, why you were sad. If you were ashamed, that you were ashamed, and some curiosity about why, and a willingness to understand that that was a big deal for you in your 6, 8, 10-year-old body. That's what we mean by attunement. Now, the second of the big 6 is responsiveness. That's the second thing every kid needs. So if attunement refers to like reading your face at the dinner table, responsiveness is getting at, okay, well, what did your dad do when he saw that you were sad or disappointed or enraged? How did your mother respond to your sad face after you lost your soccer game? Was there responsiveness from your primary caregivers to your emotional climate, your emotional states? And for many people, when they look back on their growing up years, they don't have a sense, they don't have memory of being responded to with care, with curiosity, with kindness. And when you don't have responsive caregivers, your brain the appropriate word is damaged. The neural circuitry of your brain does not develop sufficiently. Why? Because children need attuned and responsive caregivers in order for their brains to differentiate and link. In other words, in order for the portions of their brain that hold memory to become both separated and connected at the same time. And that's what makes for a stable brain, which is code for secure attachment. Mm-hmm. So those are the first 2, attunement, responsiveness. The third one that you need engagement. What does that mean? Well, children need to be pursued by their primary caretakers. What is pursuit? It is a drawing out of their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their idiosyncrasies. What is it that makes 8-year-old Adam Adam? How am I different from my brothers? That's what engagement is getting at, is I needed my dad to draw out what made Adam unique, because every child is unique. And in that sense, every child needs to be parented differently, needs to be engaged differently. So if you're a 12-year-old boy and you think back on being a 7th grader, did you have a sense that your mother, that your father pursued your heart and drew out what made you you? If you don't have memory of pursuit, then your heart has been wounded. And that wounding is still affecting you. That's the premise of the Big Six. So that's the first 3. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to ponder the first 3 together?
I do want to ponder the first 3. The attunement portion. You know, when babies are young, you point this out in your book, like they are 100% dysregulated. They're all over the place. We need, as little babies, we needed to be encouraged when we were down. As little babies, when we got excited, we need somebody to calm us down. At some point, I think it's apparent that parents feel like, well, I guess they're kind of on their own. Like there's a moment in our stories where, well, I'd say this, a lot of babies don't even get that, truthfully. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah.
But then at some point we start looking at the kid, and I say, as a father, there was a point when my son was 12 years old, and I began internally, because of my own story, to expect my son to be able to take care of himself. Right. So, hey man, you need to grow up. You need to start acting like a man. And boy, did I hurt my son in significant ways.
Yep.
And I'm sure I've done the same with my daughter. So for a dad, is there a simple way to practice kind of an entry level if we feel like we're not doing well at attuning to our children? Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little bit of counsel on how we might be able to do that tonight, even at the dinner table?
Sure. Like 2 thoughts immediately come to mind. The first is ask questions. The second is learn to read nonverbal communication. Children, well, this is true for adults. Human beings communicate primarily without words. That's very important to understand. 70% of our communication is nonverbal. What do I mean by that? Tone of voice, facial expression, body language. So the example I give about this is if I said this to my daughter when she asked, what's nonverbal communication? She was 8 years old. And I looked at her and I had this beaming smile on my face. And I said, Hope, that's her name, Hope, I hate you. And she burst into laughter because of the contrast. The words are absolutely devastating to an 8-year-old's heart. But that's not what moved her, because she's reading my face. So for fathers at the dinner table, do you have a face that communicates to your child a desire to know what's going on for them in their hearts and in their bodies? And then, are you reading their tone of voice and their facial expression? Are you learning how to read your child? And each child communicates differently. And so you need to become increasingly adept at reading the face and the tone of voice of your sons and daughters. And the one way to do that is to check in with them with questions like, you look sad. Are you feeling sad? Or you look mad. Are you feeling mad? Or what's that like for you? To ask questions gives you data about whether what you're reading is accurate or not. And that's a great place to start. Curiosity, kindness, and reading nonverbal communication.
A lot of teenagers give one-word answers.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And for many fathers who do not have a lot of skill when it comes to helping, and we also get scared, and we also get our feelings hurt when our children, it feels like they are literally trying to hurt our feelings and push us away. How would you counsel those fathers who it appears are being rejected and their curiosity is being deflected?
Yeah. Well, it's very important that you do your own work so that you can bear whatever big feelings you have when you are rejected by your child, whether they're a teenager or they're 4 years old. Like, you have to, and this actually leads to the number 4 of the big 6, which is you have to be able to regulate their affect. You can't require them to regulate yours. And what is affect? Affect is your felt bodily sensations. So we all know what it's like to get enraged, panicked, anxious. That's called hyper arousal. And many people know what it's like to get dissociated, detached, numb, ashamed. That's called hypoarousal. But affect exists on that continuum from hypoarousal to hyperarousal. Children go through the range of affect on a daily basis many, many different times. They'll shut down. They'll get amped up with rage. They'll get amped up with panic. My son was getting chased by a bee the other day. Absolute panic. That's called dysregulated affect or hyperarousal. Now, here's the thing. Children have very limited abilities to regulate their affect. They do not have the necessary brain structures to calm their own body when they get freaked out or panicked or enraged. They need you as a father or a mother to interactively regulate their affect for them. How do you do that? By presence, by soothing, by physical touch, by bringing your nervous system next to theirs and helping either calm them down if they're amped up, or stimulate them back to life if they're feeling shame, detachment, numbness. But either way, you are interactively regulating their bodies. And that's the 4th thing that children need from their parents, is they need their parents to be willing to and able to regulate their affect for them. So if you as a father are so upset because you're feeling rejected by your sons, your teenage sons pushing you away, I would really encourage you to do some work with regard to your own heart, your own story, your own emotions, so that you can learn how to self-soothe that stuff and therefore be present to your child, regardless of what's going on for your kid emotionally.
So that's another huge conversation, obviously. Another reason to read the book, because that will make a lot more sense, and it will the idea of soothing yourself may sound like woo woo if you've never been invited into that and if you weren't taught that as a kid. Okay, so we don't have time to go into all of that, but in the moment, a dad is listening to this podcast for the first time. He's humble. He's sitting at the table with his child. He sees their child dysregulated. He, out of curiosity, begins to pursue. And then in the course of that pursuit, for whatever reason, he's feeling all these feelings and fears rising up. Okay, like without having read the book, without having gone deep into stuff, what is your recommendation to the dad who is beginning to feel dysregulated himself?
Yeah. It's a great question. Just to acknowledge it, to let everyone in the family know what everyone in the family is knowing, but they can't know. In other words, for you to have the courage and the honesty to say, hey, I'm feeling some really big feelings right now. Like I'm I'm activated, triggered, whatever word you want to use for this. And I need to take some time just to get grounded again so that I can be the father that I want to be. You have you have absolute every right in the world to need to take a break from parenting and tend to your own heart when you get dysregulated. That is very good fathering. But what most of us tend to do is we get upset with ourselves that we're dysregulated, that we're amped up, that we're freaked out, and we try and push through and endure. And what we end up doing is acting and speaking from a very dysregulated place, and nothing good happens when we do that.
Yeah, this takes me back to one of my worst moments in my story. I've got a son who is 2.5 years older, 2 years older than my daughter. And boys, when they're young, we're talking 7, 8 years old, they like to discover their strength by picking on a weaker member of the family. And my daughter was often the recipient of his hostility, unkindness, and his desire to discover how strong he was. And that reminded me of the pain of my own childhood. Mm-hmm. It became one of my deepest prayers, even in the womb for them, is may their relationship with one another be one of love. I pray, God, please do not let it be a repetition of mm-hmm. what I was guilty of in my own household. Mm-hmm. And so there was one day after, 2 years of this going on and trying to manage my son's behavior in our home that I heard my daughter screaming, and it was the scream that happens when she's been hit. Mm-hmm. They've got different types of screams. And I went from the kitchen where I was doing dishes in what felt like a half a second. I felt like the Hulk, Dr. David Banner, if that's his name. Something immediately flooded through my body, and I hurtled over the couch, and I got in my son's face, and I grabbed him with my hands, his arms in my hands, and I looked at him, and I began to shake him, and I yelled at him, stop. I actually don't even remember what had happened, because I was actually so shocked by mm-hmm. what had just happened in my own body.
Right.
And even as it's coming out of my mouth, I had not even finished the sentence, whatever it is that I said to him. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a wound for him mm-hmm. and for me. Mm-hmm. And, I had to go. I had to apologize, extract myself from the situation. And from that moment, I began thinking, I don't know exactly what to do, but I can't react in situations anymore. I have to figure out what it looks like and what it feels like to respond instead mm-hmm. of react. Mm-hmm. So really bad memory in my story, where I was clearly not going after my daughter's heart or my son's heart. Mm-hmm. This was all about me in that moment. Mm-hmm. And it's still painful to think about that. And it reminded me of who I was when I was a 7-year-old boy with my sisters.
Yes. And that kind of thing happens to all of us, where stories from our own childhood get reenacted, repeated in some way in our fathering or mothering. That happens it is inevitable until you engage and make sense of your story as a boy.
Excellent. Okay, so the big 6. Number 1, attunement. Mm-hmm. Number 2, responsiveness. Number 3, engagement. Number 4, as a parent, it's our job to help regulate our children's affect. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's keep going with number 5.
Number 5 thing, the 5th thing that kids need from their parents is you needed your parents. When you were a boy, when you were a girl, you needed your parents to be strong enough to handle your big feelings, your big emotions. what, your so-called, especially your so-called negative emotions, fear, sadness, and anger. So when you think back as a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, was fear welcomed were you allowed to be afraid? Or did you get reprimanded for being, chicken or scaredy cat? Was your fear welcome in your home? And what about your anger? Were you allowed to be enraged, angry as a boy? And were you allowed to be sorrowful, sad? If you weren't, if those emotions were not welcomed in your home, then your brain, your heart has been wounded because you were not free to feel what image bearers, especially when we're children, feel with great frequency, which is we feel fear, we feel sorrow, and we feel anger. And so you needed to be able to feel those feelings in your home.
I know as well of people who are not allowed to feel positive emotions like joy, excitement, happiness. It was not allowed because the parents could not handle it because of their own.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so now on that one, what is the extreme of that? Like a child needs to be able to say these things to a parent without the parent flipping out. Anything.
So if, when you were a 5-year-old boy, think back, or a 7-year-old boy, were you allowed to say to your mother, I hate you, or I'm so mad that you wouldn't buy me that ice cream treat? Were you allowed to express intensity without your mother either reprimanding you, sending you to your room, or dissolving into a proverbial puddle of tears by saying, don't you know that hurts mom's feelings? How could you possibly say that to your mother? I mean, parents weaponize their fragility with frequency. And when that's the case, you as a boy or a girl do not feel the freedom to be who you are with all of your big feels. And that's very damaging to the brain.
Because at some point, if the parent can't handle those things, the child is actually learning at a young age to take care of their parents because their parents can't take care of them.
Exactly. The roles get reversed, and the child begins to attune to mom rather than mom attuning to the child. The child begins to read mom's face and respond to what mom can handle by self-editing their own big feelings, rather than mom being the one who is self-editing and taking care of the child. And that happens all the time, especially if you have a history of trauma.
You said in the book, which I highlighted and have gone back to over and over and over again, and by the way, my wife is reading the book at the same time. She's one chapter behind me, and so it has been amazing for the two of us to be able to have conversations about this. Like, so many things are becoming clear. But you said it is the job of the parent to give, and it is the job of the child to receive. Such a simple statement, and yet so elusive in so many homes.
Absolutely. That's the way it's designed. And it's the only relationship on the planet that should be like that. But the parent-child relationship is not designed to be reciprocal.
Well, I've got a 22-year-old and a 21-year-old, and still it's that way. Yeah, good. Yeah. Well, it's growing. I'm understanding it to be that way. There's something in me as a parent that's like, okay, now you can take care of yourself. You can take care of yourself. And I want now some things that my children probably still can't give, but that's more my issue,
right?
And it's not theirs, right? So learning how to give them the freedom that they that they need and make them feel safe. Because ultimately, I want them coming back home again and again and again. And I don't want them feeling like they have to take care of me and dance around me. And yeah. Okay. Number 6.
Number 6, and it's probably the most important. You, as a boy or a girl, needed your parents to be willing to repair the harm that they did when they did it. All parents do harm. That doesn't make them bad people. I'm a parent. I've done plenty of harm to my children. The question is, were your primary caregivers willing and open and initiating of repair conversations? What do I mean by that? I'm sorry, sweetheart, that I did that. Bud, I lost my temper the other day, and I am sorry, and I regret it, and I'm working on it. And if you want to tell me more what that was like for you, I want to hear. That is the language of repair. Any language that invites the child to say more about what the experience was like, that owns the harm that was done, and that communicates to the child, I want to not do that anymore. That's the language of repair. And you needed that not only when you were 5, 10, 15. If your parents are 80 and you're 50, you still need that. We need repair because the world of relationships ruptures all the time. That's just what it means to be human. The question is, will the person who did the harm initiate and be open to conversations of repair? And sadly, for many of the listeners, the idea of saying to their mom or dad, even if they're, 75 years old, Dad, could we have a conversation about some of the ways you harmed me growing up? Like the listeners are like, I could never say that sentence to my dad. Well, that had a big effect in terms of attachment, i.e. insecure attachment on your brain, because you needed that deeply, and you still do.
Mm-hmm. You in your book explain that there's exactly what a healthy relationship is in light of what you just said about rupture and repair. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what you said was a healthy relationship is not marked by one where there is no conflict, where there is no rupture. It's actually, go ahead and explain.
Yeah, it's the willingness of the parent to own and rectify failure when it does occur. All parents do harm. All parents fail at attunement, responsiveness, engagement. That's just part of being human. The question is, will you as a father recognize when you've hurt your son or your daughter? And will you go into their room that night, sit on the edge of their bed, and say, look, I realized that when I said or did that thing earlier today, it probably really affected you. And I really wish I hadn't said that or done that thing. And I'm sorry. And I would love to talk with you about what that was like for you whenever you want. That's initiating a conversation of repair. That stuff needs to happen in healthy relationships, not just with children, but with coworkers, with spouses. Repair is very important.
Mm-hmm. I'm learning to do that now with my wife at the age of 53.
Great.
It wasn't a skill that I learned growing up. So It's hard. It's scary. And yet it's breathtakingly beautiful. And there is fresh air in our home that has not been here for years because neither of us really were taught how to do that well.
Yes.
How often does a parent have to get it right? Our goal, of course, is to raise securely attached children. Mm-hmm. Like many 50%. Of us are probably... Say that again?
50%. 50% of the time is what the research shows is necessary for attunement, responsiveness, engagement. You only have to hit 1 out of every 2 at-bats. Here's the key is, will you repair when you misattune? When you realize that you struck out, that you didn't do it well, will you go back and have conversation with your son or daughter about what that was like for them, what it was like for you, and will you repair the misattunement or the lack of responsiveness or the lack of pursuit, whatever it is, will you repair? That's why that one, number 6, is so very, very important, because it allows for reconnection with the child in a state of shame or disconnection. And that is incredibly healing for the brain of a child.
And for the parent.
And for the parent.
Yeah. Well, friends, sons, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Adam Young. Adam, thank you for writing this. Thank you for sharing your time with us, giving just a little bit of insight into what God wants to do in us, even as parents. He's going back in our story. And one of the things that you will find as you read this book, one of the things that I'm so grateful to you for, Adam, is that you stress kindness over and over again, because every time I've tried to engage my story in the past, it has been with contempt and with fear and with like a need to edit in the moment. I have to get this right in the moment. And you have a completely different approach to this, which has made this book, which years ago probably would have been terrifying, or I've read books, listened to podcasts from other people, which actually almost invite contempt as we go back into our story. You have done the impossible, it feels like. You have written a book that is the kindness of God. It is his heart saying, come, let us discuss this together. Let's go back in your story. I have things to tell you. I have a story to tell you that you do not yet know. And it's a wonderful, it's just incredible. So, Adam, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom and for creating this beautiful book that I'm going to give to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Jay. It's been good to be with you.
Thank you. And so you can go and listen to Adam on the Where We Find Ourselves podcast, and you can find this book on Make Sense of Your Story on Amazon. Thanks a lot.
See ya.
Yep. Bye. Sons, I hope you appreciated that conversation with Adam. He has so much to give, and I want to encourage you to continue to pursue your healing and to do it in a way that was probably maybe the most disruptive part of the process, and that is to do it with great kindness. Here's what I am finding, is that to choose to engage my story and to treat my heart with kindness as opposed to contempt is resulting in me experiencing the kindness of God, but also looking to God and asking him to reveal his kindness to me as I move into my story is allowing me to be more kind to myself. So like it's this beautiful cycle. As I show kindness to myself, God reveals his kindness to me. As I seek God's kindness, he offers me the ability to engage my own story and my own heart with greater kindness. It's really beautiful. And the enemy is losing ground. So after 19 years, after a long, hard-fought battle using warfare, journaling, counseling, multiple counseling intensives, weekly counselings, going to places to try and get my heart back, places of wilderness and frontier, going to conferences. All of them failed to have the impact on me that I wanted them to in the moment, but all of them gave me something, a piece that he is now bringing together. So I just want to encourage you, do not give up. God is in this. He is a long-haul God. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is in everything and through everything. And to become comfortable with God's lifelong pursuit of you, to be comfortable with the fact that healing comes partially, but his love is there always in whole. To discover that leads us to every subsequent step of healing. And I just want to encourage you to know that. And I want to invite you to take that journey with me. So thank you, sons, for joining Adam Young and I as we walk and talk a mile on the tried and true road to being sons.